Hi everyone, welcome to part 3 endocrine system. We will learn about the primary endocrine glands, the hormones that they produce, and also the target cell for each hormone. Just to make sure you understand that there is always logical connection between the endocrine glands, the target cell, and the actions of hormones on the target cells. We start with the first primary gland. It's called the pituitary gland. This pituitary gland is also known as the master glands. So this gland produces about 7 to 9 hormones. The location of this pituitary gland is in the base of the brain. And the productions, the secretion of hormones from this gland is also controlled by the brain. And this gland is sometimes also considered as part of the nervous system and part of the endocrine system. So this is a connection between nervous system and endocrine system. This gland is attached to the hypothalamus, and there is a direct connection between hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. There are two portions of these pituitary glands. The anterior lobe is called the anterior pituitary glands, and the posterior lobes, the posterior pituitary gland. Again, the secretion and production of hormone from these two lobes is controlled by hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is part of the brain, so the brain is actually also controls the endocrine system. Okay, so this is location of the pituitary gland. So if you see this gland over here, this is pituitary gland. It has two portions. The anterior lobes is bigger. It produces 6 to 7 hormones, and the posterior lobes is smaller. They have 2 hormones in the posterior lobe. Is not really produced, but it secretes 2 hormones. And it has a direct connection with the hypothalamus. So this is the hypothalamus over here. Okay, so this hypothalamus control the productions of hormones from this pituitary gland. So the anterior lobes of pituitary gland is controlled by hypothalamus by producing what we call the releasing or inhibiting hormone. So there will be 2 types of hormones produced by the hypothalamus, and these 2 hormones may be releasing hormones or inhibiting hormone. Releasing hormones mean the hormones that stimulate production of certain hormones in the pituitary gland. Inhibiting hormones is the hormones that inhibit production of hormone from the pituitary gland. Okay, so hypothalamus again control the pituitary gland whether by releasing or inhibiting hormone. So the releasing hormone will stimulate production of hormones, and each releasing hormone will act to the specific groups of cells in the anterior pituitary gland. So again, there are about 7 hormones produced by anterior pituitary glands. They might control by this releasing hormone or inhibiting hormone from the hypothalamus. The posterior lobes, they actually don't really produce the hormone. The hormone itself is produced from the hypothalamus. So the two hormones produced by the hypothalamus, which is ADH and oxytocin, that will be stored in the posterior pituitary gland. And then after that will be released from this posterior pituitary gland. This is just showing us the connection and how the hypothalamus over here control the anterior pituitary gland by producing, releasing, and inhibiting hormones. Hypothalamus produce hormones that will be stored in the posterior pituitary gland. There are two hormones, antidiuretic hormone or ADH and the oxytocin. But there is no inhibiting or releasing hormone produced to the posterior pituitary gland. Okay, so this is showing us hypothalamus maybe produce the releasing hormones that increase or stimulate production of certain hormone from the anterior pituitary gland. Okay. And these hormones will be delivered to the target cell. Maybe it will also go to another endocrine gland to increase the production of hormone from this endocrine gland. And then finally, the hormones will go to the target cell. So anterior pituitary gland can also produce inhibiting hormones that will inhibit the hypothalamus from producing certain hormones. And the certain hormone produced by certain endocrine glands in our body can also produce inhibiting hormones that inhibit anterior pituitary gland or inhibit the hypothalamus. Okay. Like for samples, the ovary produce estrogen. If there are so many estrogen produced, then this estrogen is actually become inhibit. So the ovary also produce the inhibiting hormones that inhibit the anterior pituitary gland to produce FSH. And this inhibiting hormone from ovary can also inhibit hypothalamus from producing the GnRH, gonadotropic releasing hormone. Okay. So this GnRH, when it is produced, it will increase FSH. FSH will go to the ovary, increase estrogen production. When the estrogens produce so much, then this ovary, let's say this is ovary, will produce the inhibin, which is the hormone that will inhibit FSH and GnRH production. Okay, so this is the connection between hormones, the target cell, and the control of the release. Anterior pituitary hormones. Okay, so the anterior pituitary gland hormones, there are 7 of them produced from these anterior lobes. The first one is called the growth hormones, and the name is telling you this is needed for growing. Prolactin or PRL. PRL is the one that will increase milk production. So the name is telling you lactin, lactase, which is milk. Thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. This hormone will go to the thyroid gland. Okay. Again, most of the time the name of hormone will tell you the action and also telling you the target cell. Adrenocorticotropic Hormone, ACTH. And the name is telling you it will go to the adrenal gland to increase production of certain hormones. Follicle Stimulating Hormone, FSH. Okay, and the name again telling you is about follicle. In the ovary, there is follicular cell. So this FSH will go to ovary and also to the testicles. Luteinizing hormones, this is also similar with the FSH, will go to the ovaries and the testicle. Melanocyte Stimulating Hormone, MSH. And the name again telling you this is about melanocyte, and melanocytes are the cell that produce skin pigment. So this is located in the skin epidermis. So this MSH will go to the skin epidermis to maybe increase production of melanin. Now, the hormone that control each of these 7 hormones produced by the anterior glands. Okay? So, for example, the hypothalamus will produce GHRH, growth hormone releasing hormone, in order to increase production of growth hormone. The hypothalamus will also produce the growth hormone inhibiting hormone in order to inhibit the growth hormone. Okay, so there are 2 hormones produced by the hypothalamus. One is releasing hormone, the other one is inhibiting hormone that will control the growth hormones, okay, from the anterior pituitary gland. The prolactin, so this is produced by anterior pituitary glands, is controlled by the PIH and PRF. So this is inhibiting hormones. It will inhibit prolactin. This is releasing factor, so prolactin releasing factor. This one will increase production of prolactin. So inhibit, increase. The TSH produced by the anterior pituitary gland, the production is actually controlled by the TRH that is produced by the hypothalamus to increase the TSH production. The Adrenocorticotropic Hormone, ACTH, the production is controlled by CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone produced by this hypothalamus. The FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, luteinizing hormone, both of these hormones controlled by gonadotropin releasing hormones that is produced by the hypothalamus. So both of these hormones, FSH and LH, will be stimulated by this GnRH. The MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormones, will be controlled by the PIH and the CRH. This one increase, the PIH will decrease. So all of these hormones over here, they are produced by the hypothalamus in order to control these 7 hormones produced by the anterior pituitary gland. So again, hypothalamus control the anterior pituitary gland in hormones productions and release. This is a diagram that's showing you how the controls. Okay, so this is the hormone that produced by the anterior pituitary gland: growth hormone, prolactin, thyroid stimulating hormone, ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, luteinizing hormone, FSH, maybe one more over here is MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone. Okay, so all of these 7 hormones over here is actually controlled by this hormone that is produced by the hypothalamus. Okay, like growth hormone controlled by the GRRH and GHIH, like somatostatin. PIH control the prolactin, PRH control the TSH, CRH control the ACTH, GnRH control both LH and FSH. And these hormones, like the growth hormones, it will go to their target cell. And when we talk about growing, we know the organ that growing is bone. So the bone is become the target cell for the growth hormone. Also, our muscle growing. So this is also target for the growth hormone. And the liver and fat tissue, because this is source of energy for growing. So these three organs over here become the target cell for growth hormone. So this is very logical. Okay, growth mostly bone and muscle, and we require energy from the storage. Prolactin, the name is telling you this is related to the milk. Therefore, the target will be the mammary gland. The TSH, the name is telling you this is thyroid stimulating hormone. Then the target will be the thyroid gland to produce the thyroid hormone. ACTH, this is adrenal, so the target will be adrenal gland to produce the cortisol and androgens over here. LH, FSH, this is sexual, related to the sexual reproduction. So the target will be, if it is female, will be ovary. If it is male, it's going to be testis. So this is, as I mentioned before, there will be logical connection between the glands, the target cell, the hormone, and the actions of hormone on the each of the target cell. Okay, the function of the anterior pituitary hormones. We already mentioned a little bit about growth hormones. This is for growing. Therefore, the target will be cell that is growing, so mostly the bones. So the bone cell will be divided rapidly, so our bones become longer than we are growing. And also the muscle, so the proteins of the muscle will be synthesized and the muscle become bigger. And of course, the storage for energy, like the fat tissue, liver, it's going to be another target for the growth hormone to make us growing. Prolactin, the name is telling you it is promoting the milk production, so the target will be the mammary gland. TSH, the name is telling you the target will be thyroid gland in order to produce the thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. ACTH, the name is telling you this is adrenal, so it's going to be adrenal glands in order to increase production of cortisol and some other hormone produced by the adrenal gland like the androgen. FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and the name is telling you this is related to production. So the target will be the ovary for female and the testicle for males. The main function is to increase production of estrogens, development of follicular cell, sperm production for male. LH, luteinizing hormone. This is also another reproductive hormone. It will go to the ovary and testicle. In the ovary, it will increase production of progesterones and also ovulation, release of eggs from the ovary. And for the male, LH will increase the production of testosterone. And then melanocyte stimulating hormone, the name is telling you, it will increase production of melanin from melanocyte. So in the research, it is used to increase the production of pigment in the frog's skin. So the frog skin become darker if they receive this MSH. Okay, the pathway and the thyroid hormone, if we talk about thyroid hormone, it will start from TRH, that is produced by the hypothalamus. This TRH will stimulate the production of THH from anterior pituitary gland. Okay, and this THH will go to the thyroid gland to increase production of thyroid hormone. And then thyroid hormones released from this thyroid gland will go to the target cell. The target cell for the thyroid hormone is actually all cells in our body to increase what we call the basal metabolic rate. So metabolism in our cell is increased by these thyroid hormones produced by the thyroid gland. That is actually stimulated by TSH produced by the anterior pituitary gland, and this TSH is stimulated by the TRH that is produced from the hypothalamus. So you see there's a pathway, the connection between one gland to another gland, and finally to the target cell. So this showing you the diagrams of this production of the thyroid hormones over here. Okay, it starts from hypothalamus. Hypothalamus produce TRH. TRH will increase production of TSH. TSH will go to the bloodstream and go to the thyroid gland to increase the production of thyroid hormone. The thyroid hormone from the thyroid gland will go to the bloodstream and finally reach the target cell. Some clinical application. This is due to the disorder of production of hormones. For example, if the production of growth hormones from the anterior pituitary gland is too little or less than normal, so hypo means lower, so lower than normal, then the effects will be the individual will have short body stature. So it's called a dwarfism. So it's dwarf due to the lower secretion or production of growth hormones. If the growth hormones is produced too much or hypersecretions, and then what happens? The individual become giants, very, very tall. So it's called the gigantism or giantism. If, for example, these hypersecretions of growth hormone happening during adulthood, then the individual will have very thick bone. Okay, remember adult, they will not growing taller because their bone actually stop growing taller or longer, but their bones still be able to become thicker. So if the growth hormone is produced too much, this adult individual will have thicker bone, and this condition is called the acromegaly. So this is the one that related to the growth hormone production. Again, if it is happening during childhood, if it is hyposecretion, the children become dwarf. The condition is called the hypopituitary dwarfism. If it is happening during the childhood and too much production of growth hormone, the child becomes giant. Okay? It's called the gigantism. If it is happening during the adulthood, then this adult individual will have thicker bone. It is called the acromegaly. Now we go to the posterior part of pituitary gland. There are two hormones over there. The first one is called the ADH, antidiuretic hormones. Another name of ADH is vasopressin. So vasopressin is the same as ADH. And the main function of this hormone is to decrease urine production and sweat production. So the main function is actually to keep or retain water in our body. Okay, so retain water. The second hormones from this pituitary gland, posterior pituitary gland, is the oxytocin, or sometimes it is called OT, oxytocin. And this main function of this hormone is for increasing uterine wall contraction during childbirth. And also, it's used for stimulating milk ejection during breastfeeding, right? During lactation. Okay. These are the two hormones released from the posterior pituitary gland. Now we're gonna see one by one again for the pituitary gland. Anterior lobe produce 7 hormones: growth hormone, prolactin, TSH, ACTH, FSH, LH, and MSH. The posterior part only release 2 hormones, ADH and OT. And we already discussed about these actions on the target cell. Just remember this, all of these hormones are controlled by the hypothalamus productions. So this is source of control. Now we go to the second gland. It's called the thyroid glands. The thyroid glands consists of 2 lateral lobes, connected by a smaller part or middle part called the isthmus. This is located just below the larynx, the anterior and lateral part of our trachea on our neck. Produce 3 hormones, T4 and T3, and then the calcitonin. So just for information, both T4 and T3 mostly is known as a thyroid hormone, so TH. So therefore, if we just consider T4 and T3 as one hormone, then the thyroid gland actually produces only 2 hormones: thyroid hormone and calcitonin. What is the thyroid hormone's action? So the action is for increasing metabolic rates, so basal metabolic rate on our cell. So the target for TH will be all cells in our body. Calcitonins, the main function is to decrease the calcium concentrations in the blood. Okay, so decrease calcium in the blood. So this is the diagram of thyroid hormones. So it looks like a butterfly. And this is the cells that produce the hormones. thyroid hormone and calcitonin. This is the actions. Okay, so increase the metabolic rate of all cells. And the calcitonin's main function is to lower blood calcium concentrations. Okay. So the target cell for the thyroid hormones is going to be all cells in our body. Okay, so this is the target. The target for calcitonins, okay, yes, this is a logical connection, so will be the bone. Why the bone? Because bone has a lot of calcium. Okay, so when the calcium level in the blood is lower, okay, then the calcium, when the calcium levels in the blood is so high, okay, so we need calcium level in certain normal concentration. If it is too high, for example, then calcitonin will be released from the thyroid gland, and this calcitonin will make the bone to take a lot of calcium or extra calcium from the blood. It will be stored in the bone. So calcitonin actually will make our bone stronger and harder because it will actually take a lot of calcium from the blood. So that's the function of calcitonin. The target cell will be the bones in order to take extra calcium from the blood. It will lower the blood calcium level. Some disorder of thyroid glands, if it is produced too much, if thyroid hormone produced too much, then the individual have a disease called the hyperthyroidism. The symptom and signs will be high metabolic rate, sensitive to heat, hyperactivity, it's going to be skinny, and the eyes is like the fish eyes, it's protruding eyes, and sometimes it will have bigger or swollen on the neck. It's called the goiter. So this is hyperthyroidism. Or maybe it can increase the disease called the grave disease. So this is usually more severe compared to the hyperthyroidisms. If the production is too little, so it is hypo, means low production, then the individual might have Hashimoto disease, hyperthyroidism, hypothyroidism on adults, and just a simple swelling on the neck, goiter. So this sign and symptom for the hypothyroidism will be contradictive to the hyperthyroidism. Like, for example, if the hyperthyroidism is higher metabolic rates, this one's going to be lower metabolic rate. If it is sensitive to heat, then the hypothyroidism will be sensitive to cold. Okay, so this is kind of opposite sign and symptom of these two different disorders. And this is showing us the baby that have hypothyroidism. Usually it's growing very short, like a dwarf baby with some mental retardations. This is grave disease or like a hyperthyroidism. You see the eyes is a protruding eyes, mostly skinny individual. This is a simple goiter, swelling on the neck. This is also mostly hypothyroidism due to the lower intake of iodine. So this one is easy to take care. Usually if you take the salt, using salt for your diet, then use the salt that have iodine. Okay, iodinized salt. It will resolve this problem with goiter. Okay, the next one, this is to be number three gland is parathyroid glands. They are actually located on the thyroid gland, so they kind of riding on the thyroid glands. There are 4 of them on each corner of the thyroid gland. Produce only one hormone, is called the parathyroid hormone or PTH. And this hormone is actually antagonist or opposite of the calcitonin. Remember the calcitonin? The calcitonin action is to lower calcium in the blood. The PTH action will be increase calcium level in the blood. So in case we don't have enough calcium in the blood, then PTH will be released in order to increase these calciums. So the target cell, again, is very logical. It's going to be bone, because bone has a lot of calcium in it. So when we do not have enough calcium in the blood, then the calcium from the bone will be taken and then released into the blood. So what happens if someone has too much PTH production? The bone will be fragile because there are so many calcium will be taken out from the bone. Another target will be kidney. Why kidney? Because kidney is the one that produce vitamin D. Okay? And this vitamin D function is to increase the absorption of calcium from our intestine. Okay. Also, kidney is the organ that filters the blood. So this kidney will retain the calcium from the blood. So the calcium will not be filtered by the kidney. Okay, so basically there are 2 main targets for PTH, which is bone and kidney. Okay, this is the diagram for the location of parathyroid gland. So if you see, this is thyroid glands. Then in each corner of these thyroid glands, there are parathyroid glands, so 4 of them. And this parathyroid gland produce the PTH, released into the blood, and then it go to the bone, as a target cell. And in the bones, this PTH will cause the bone to release calcium into the blood to increase the calcium level. It will also go to the kidney in order to retain or conserve calcium from the blood. So it will increase the calcium level in the blood. It will also produce vitamin D. Okay, so kidney will produce vitamin D. It will go to the intestine, and the vitamin D in the intestine will increase the calcium absorption from our diet. So this is, now you understand why there is milk. Okay, when you buy milk, usually it's adding with the vitamin D, because the function of vitamin D is to increase absorption calcium from our diet, like milk, for example. And it will finally increase the calcium concentrations in the blood. So again, the main function of PTH, parathyroid hormone, is to increase calcium concentrations in the blood, okay, by these three process over here in the target cell. And this is just showing us how the vitamin D produce. So vitamin D produced in the kidney. The precursor of vitamin D is actually produced in the skin and stimulated by the sunlight. So the UV light from the sun is actually increase the production of precursor of vitamin D, and then it's become vitamin D in the kidney. And this vitamin D finally will go to the intestine in order to increase the reabsorption of this calcium from our diet. Now the disorders, if it is hyper secretion, it means too much production of PTH, then as I mentioned before, it might cause the bone become fragile, very weak, some weight loss, fatigue, muscular weakness, tumor. Okay, maybe this is the main cause of higher production of PTH. If it is lower production, then it might cause muscle cramp because we have too few calcium in the blood. It can cause this muscle cramp, seizures. This may be some treatment for hyper or lower or hypo secretions of PTH. For hypo, sometimes you can use the injections or take dietary vitamin D. The next one is adrenal glands. It's also known as suprarenal gland. Renal means kidney because they are located above the kidney. And this gland is actually divided into two portions: the cortex, which is the outer part, and the medulla, the inner part. The outer part produces three hormones: aldosterone, cortisol, and sex hormones. It is called the androgens. And then the medulla produces two hormones: epinephrine and norepinephrine. So total, there are 5 hormones produced from adrenal gland. This is the diagrams how it's look like when it is cut in the section. So you should be able to see the outer part or the cortex and the inner part or the medulla. The outer part produces 3 hormones: aldosterone, cortisol, and androgens. The middle part produces 2 hormones: epinephrine and norepinephrine. We start with the epinephrine and norepinephrine. This hormone is actually the same like neurotransmitter that released by the sympathetic divisions of ANS, autonomic nervous system, which is increase the heart rate, increase the heart rate, increase the breathing rate, right? Dilate the blood vessels, okay, dilate the pupil. Okay, so this is the effect of epinephrine and norepinephrine, which is similar like the effect of sympathetic nervous system. The adrenal cortex, it produces three hormones. The first one is cortisol. This hormone is also known as a stress hormone. It will be produced during stressful conditions. And then aldosterone. This is the hormone that retains some electrolytes like hydrogens, sodium, and the androgens. This is sexual hormones similar to testosterone. Okay, now the action of each hormone, aldosterone, help regulate concentrations of electrolytes, mostly sodiums, and increase the secretion of potassium. So retain sodium and excrete the potassium. This is the functions of aldosterone. Cortisol, this is going to be decrease the protein synthesis, increase fatty acid release. So this is a stress hormones. When somebody is stressed, they usually use a lot of energy. So the fat tissue or the storage of energy will be released and stimulate glucose synthesis from non-carbohydrates. So mostly it will increase the glucose concentration used for energy. And then adrenal androgens, this is very similar with the testosterone, so it will control some male characteristic, and for the female, it will increase the sex drive or libido. Okay, so this is aldosterone, increase or stimulate the potassium excretion and conservation of sodium in our blood. These aldosterone, together with the renin and angiotensin hormones, will control our normal blood pressure too. So this is control for cortisol secretions. So hypothalamus, remember, it will produce the CRH. CRH will go to the anterior pituitary gland in order to produce the ACTH. It will go to the bloodstream and finally reach the adrenal glands, especially adrenal cortex. Okay, so this will increase the production of cortisol. Cortisol will go to the bloodstream and go to the target cell, like maybe liver, muscles, that will promote the use of lipids or fat tissue. Some clinicals for this disorder of this adrenal cortex hormones. There is a disease or disorder called the Addison disease. This is due to the lower production of the cortisol. If it is too much, okay, hypersecretions, then the disorder called the Cushing syndrome. The next gland is pancreas. So pancreas is not purely endocrine glands. This is mixed gland because pancreas also produces enzymes. Okay, so as I mentioned over here, it has endocrine functions. It is actually located in the middle cell. It's called the pancreatic islets. And the exocrine functions, which is the one that produces enzyme, this is located on the cortex, okay, or acini of the cell. There are 3 or 4 hormones produced by the pancreas: glucagon, insulin, somatostatin, and one more is called the pancreatic polypeptide. This is also produced by this pancreas. This is the diagram that's showing us the locations of this pancreas. It's just above our stomach. So if we make a cross section, then you should be able to see the middle part over here. It's called the islet. This is the cell that produces the hormones. On the outer part is called the acini cell, and this is the one that produces the enzyme. So this is exocrine part. Okay, so this is exocrine part, and the middle one is the endocrine part. Now the functions of glucagons. The glucagon will increase glucose levels in the blood. Okay, so it will increase glucose level. If, for example, we are fasting, we don't eat and we don't take a lot of glucoses, then the glucagons will be produced in order to increase this glucose level. The insulin, it is opposite to the glucagon. It will decrease the glucose levels in the blood. Okay, it decrease the glucose level. If, for example, we eat too much sugar, like cake, then insulin will be produced in order to decrease the blood glucose level. Somatostatins, this is the one that also help to regulate the carbohydrates. Okay, so this is the diagrams of glucagons productions and insulin production. So these two hormones are antagonistic, opposing one another. For example, after meal, after we eat, the glucose level in the blood will be increased. Then the pancreas will produce more insulin and less glucagon, because insulin will be needed to reduce this glucose level in the blood. What is the target cell going to be? The target cell will be the cell that take glucose and then make into glycogen. It's going to be, the main target is going to be liver cell. So liver is the organ that will take glucose from the blood and change them into glycogen. So insulin will go to the liver cell. Now what happens if between meal? So we don't eat, glucose level will be decreased. Then our pancreas will produce more glucagon, because this is the one that will be going to liver cell. In the liver cell, it will break down the glycogen into glucose. Okay, and this glucose then will be released into the blood to increase the level. Okay, so this is the logical actions between insulin and glucagon. If we have too much glucose, insulin will be produced. Then the liver will take the extra glucose from the blood, change it into glycogen. If we have little glucose in blood, then the glucagons will be produced. It will go to liver, and liver will break down the glycogen into glucoses, and this glucoses then will be released into the blood. Clinical application for these hormones. So it's a very famous disease called the diabetes mellitus. This is mainly due to the insulin deficiency. There are two types, type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Type 1, they usually do not produce insulin. So gradually they will produce less and less, and finally will not produce insulin. So the type 1 diabetes will require insulin injection. Yes, because they are dependent to this insulin. The type 2 diabetes usually caused by the sensitivity of liver cell that become lower for the insulin. So usually type 2 diabetes will not require insulin injection. Because they still be able to produce the insulin, but it is not highly sensitive to the liver cell. Okay, so again, the type 1 diabetes mellitus, this is also known as insulin dependent diabetic, usually begins before age 20, so like age 10, sometimes 11. These individuals start to have this sign and symptom for the type 1 diabetes mellitus. And then type 2 usually happenings in older individual. Okay, and this is mostly due to the insensitivity of liver cell to the insulin produced by the pancreas. Treatment of type 1 diabetes mellitus, because this is insulin dependence, then it requires insulin injection or administration. For the type 2 diabetes mellitus, the treatment usually to avoid higher diet with sugar, and then also exercise regularly. There are some medications that can lower sugar concentrations or production. That's all for this part 3. Endocrine glands, hormones, and the target cell, and also actions on the target cell. I will see you on the next part of this endocrine system. Goodbye.